I do appreciate Jacob and Brittany. I have known Brittany since before she knew Brittany. I was there the day she was born. Her folks are very dear friends of ours, and love her and her family dearly, and have come to know and love Jacob through the years as well. And actually, there's some connections back with our family from Lawrenceburg even. So my brother-in-law was a youth minister, I think, at times when Jacob was a youth. He was a youth at one time, no question. I looked up family in the dictionary, and I got a lot of different definitions. I've got handouts here, by the way, if somebody wants to help pass those out. I like to do this. I found that if you see something and you do something with it, then you tend to retain a little bit more of it than otherwise. And so I just like to do a simple handout, and we'll have a handout each time we get together, Lord willing. And maybe it'll be something that you can follow along and maybe follow up with. If nothing else, it'll A, help you stay awake, and B, you'll have something to make a paper airplane out of later. So, it's hopefully we haven't killed too many trees in the process here. And I'll just leave some of these in case some others come in. How about that? That's good. Okay. Looked up family in the dictionary, and I got a lot of different definitions. When I say family, what do you think of? This is a class, right? So I like some feedback. When you say family, what comes to your mind? Mother, father, okay. Sisters, wife, kids, good, okay. Mostly we think probably initially at least in terms of a biological family, or at least a family in which we are raised or connected with in some way. Family, by definition, is a group of people who are related to each other. And by the way, if you Google family and then look under images, you get all kinds of pictures. Most of those are generic. I found some that might be a little more familiar. You might see here in the middle left the family that you recognize, and maybe in the lower right-hand corner, something called the first family. There's even cartoon families, and Jacob pointed out this is my family in the lower left-hand corner, with the exception of our foster grandson. We're not supposed to take pictures of him until he is fully adopted and so forth, so that's why we don't have him pictured, but he's still very much a part of our family, and we're very excited about that. But family is a group of people who are related to each other in some way or another. You scroll on down the list of definitions for family, and you'll see that it may be a group of persons of common ancestry. You can trace your roots back. We talk about a family tree, right? And that is where your family branches off and how it goes back and where your roots are. There's also a definition of family that has to do with a group of people united by certain convictions or a common affiliation. Maybe that rings a bell with you a little bit, because sometimes we talk about the church as family, the family of God. In fact, the New Testament, when Paul's writing to Timothy, he talked about, some translations there talk about the family of God or the household of God, in reference to those who are united by certain convictions or common affiliation. Another definition has to do with a group of things related by common characteristics, like chemical compounds or elements. We may talk about a family of chemical compounds that I know we've got at least one pharmacist here. Certain things fit together well and work and complement each other, and certain things don't. They don't really connect, and maybe it can be even dangerous if you put them together. So that's another category of family. Then one definition that I saw was the family is the basic unit in society, traditionally consisting of two parents rearing their children. And then a variation of that is any of various social units differing but regarded as equivalent to the traditional family. For example, a single parent family. Some families are single-parent families. So family can be a lot of different things to a lot of people. Do any of you consider people who are not your blood relatives, who are not your birth relatives, do any of you consider other people as your family in some ways? Do you think about this church family, for example? There's a connection here that you have that you don't have with other people, maybe even in some cases with blood relatives. Maybe there's a person who was a dear friend of your father or mother that sort of became like an adopted aunt, or maybe you have some adopted grandparents, unofficial, somebody like that, an older person who maybe was influential in your life, encouraging to you, helpful in some way. Maybe there's a team or an organization that you were a part of. Some colleges and universities have sororities and fraternities, and that carries with it the connotation of family, brotherhood, connection, brothers and sisters. Maybe there's that kind of connection that you have with family. I want to ask this question. I want to start out just kind of by way of getting your juices flowing, and I hope that you have thought about this a little bit. But why is it important for us to even discuss family matters this week? Why is it important that we do that? Why is it important to you that we talk about family matters? Yes?
They have said that if you want to destroy the country, destroy the family, and the country will unravel.
Okay, very good. In fact, in one of the definitions, the last definition that I read, sort of implied that family is at least important, if not essential, to society. And some have said that family is like the building blocks of a society. And so, yeah, it stands to reason. If family is important in a culture and a society, then one way to destroy that culture and society is to attack the family. And by the way, one of the reasons it's important that, from my perspective, that we study family has to do directly with that, because one of the ways that Satan attacks our society is by attacking the family, right? And that's the way he would seek to destroy our society. Are there other reasons why family matters might be important to you?
If your family isn't functioning, it really just affects your day-to-day life.
Okay, yeah, it has. Anybody ever get upset when you have a little spat or let's just say intense discussion with your husband or your wife, and just sort of messes up your whole day? Almost like rain before 7 o'clock in the morning. Anybody ever have that experience, right? And maybe at work you're distracted because you're worried about what you said to her or she said to you or what's going on. Any other things connected with family like that? Like maybe you ever know of a family that struggled with finances, that maybe couldn't get all their money stuff in order and had trouble making ends meet, and that caused all kinds of strife and difficulty. There's a lot of different angles in which family issues, family matters are important to our day-to-day living. Just think about our in-laws. That's always a running joke. My mother-in-law is going to come this next weekend. And I'll tell you how much I love my mother-in-law, okay? We're going to Gatlinburg for about 3 days, and I'm taking my mother-in-law with me. How about that? My wife and I are taking my mother-in-law with us. That's how much I love her. But, we do joke about in-laws and that sort of thing. But you've known families like that, right? That just the in-laws couldn't get along, and there was always a tug or a pull between the families, the extended families, and that's another reason that family matters are important. Can you think of other reasons why family matters might be important?
How do you raise your children?
Okay, certainly. It impacts not only you, but the next generation, or in some cases, several generations down the line. Your influence has to do with your children, and then their children beyond them, etc. You were impacted by your parents, right? You have been influenced, for good or bad, by your parents and by their parents before them. So we understand that there's a generational issue that's at play here when we talk about family matters. So that's another important reason, and that's a very good one as well. It does impact our children, how we raise our children, and how our children will be shaped and formed and reared is a kind of an old-fashioned word, but it's one that I think most of us can relate to. Can you think of other reasons? I can think of at least one more very important reason. why we ought to discuss family matters this week, and it relates directly to the family of God. That is, if family matters are not dealt with in accordance with God's will, then how does that impact our relationship with God? You know, isn't it true that all things considered, when it comes to the end of our lives, the number one thing that's going to matter is what is my relationship with God? I mean, educational achievement is wonderful. I'm all for that. My wife's a teacher. I come from a whole family of teachers. I'm the black sheep in the family. I'm a preacher. I believe education is important. It's great that we do that. I think other kinds of achievements and accomplishments are wonderful. Athletic accomplishments, musical, acting, whatever, all those kinds of things are great. The things we emphasize, they're so important. If you succeed in the business world, in politics, or whatever it may be, you may leave your mark on the world in a number of ways. But when we come to the end of the day, when you're standing before an open casket, the only thing that matters is what is that person's relationship with God. And if family matters are not aligned with God's will, then our relationship with God can't be right. You know, John said over in 1 John, if you say you love God but hate your brother, how can the love of God dwell in you? You know, that's something that we need to get right in order for our relationship with God to be right. So that's a very important reason. I hope that it's really the number one reason why we ought to focus on family matters this week and really every week. This is going to be kind of an emphasis. Now, I tell you what, I struggled with knowing how to zero in on some things with regard to family matters this weekend. And Jacob's been very helpful. He said, why don't we do maybe just kind of a general lesson about family, which is this morning, and then why don't we do maybe a couple of lessons about marriage, which we're going to do in the worship hour and then this evening. And why don't we do a couple of lessons on parenting? We're going to do that Monday and Tuesday evening. And then why don't we do something even for us old heads, you know, grandparenting, and the influence of older people in our generations. And so we're going to do that Wednesday evening. That's how we're going to close out. But really, we're just going to scratch the surface. All right? This is an area of study. We could spend just the entire week talking about marriage relationships. And in fact, that wouldn't even begin to cover everything we need to talk about. We could spend the entire time talking about parenting issues, about child-rearing issues, about inter-family relationships, all kinds of things that we could talk about. So we're just going to introduce some ideas, and hopefully this will spur some thought within you to grow deeper and study more. And just maybe the goal this week should be just that we're going to be more committed than ever to making sure that our family is right and keeping with God's will. Would that be a pretty good goal for us to have? Just that we're going to make sure that we prioritize what really matters to God with regard to our family. So that's where we're going to kind of go. And this morning is going to be sort of an introduction to this. Certainly we're not going to intend for this to be comprehensive in nature, but hopefully we'll be able to hit some things that will be important to this discussion. Okay, so what are some characteristics of family as God sees it? People see family in all kinds of different ways, and in fact, there's some definitions of family that are cropping up in culture, not only our culture, but other cultures around the world, that would conflict with God's will. So what we want to do is, what does God say and what does God see about the family? And I would like to suggest three things here that the Bible tells us, at least by implication, by illustration and example, that are important to families. And the first thing is that families are connected. Families are connected to one another. And that's part of the definition of a family. And to do that, I want us to go to the story of Abram and Lot in Genesis chapter 13. Genesis chapter 13. If you have your Bibles, turn there. You may remember that in Genesis chapter 12, Moses, in retelling the story of the Israelites and how they came to the Jordan River, ready to cross it, he talks about the beginning of time, the beginning of the earth, beginning of creation, beginning of families, even. And Then we're introduced to Abram in Genesis chapter 12, who God calls out of the Ur of the Chaldees to go to a place that he would show him. And chapter 12 sort of compresses a journey that went across what's called the Fertile Crescent from modern-day Babylonia, modern-day Iraq, from Babylonia, all the way through the Jordan Valley, and he goes all the way down into Egypt. And then chapter 13 begins with him coming up out of Egypt. Okay, so let's pick up right there. And I'm going to read, I usually use for the most part New American Standard Bible. That's what I'll be reading from right now. Your translation will be pretty close to that, but it may be slightly different. Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife, and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Lot was a relative of his. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. He made an altar at Bethel. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. We've learned in the previous chapter that Abram was very rich in flocks and herds, and God had blessed him on this journey. The land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. So you see the situation here. They're nomadic peoples, and they're wandering from Egypt back up into what we think of now as the land of Palestine or Canaan. And as they go along, their flocks and herds are needing to graze and find grazing lands. And God's blessed them so much that their flocks and herds have increased to the point that there's not enough grazing land. And so there's some land dispute that's taking place here. And there's strife, there's tension that's taking place between those who are taking care of Lot's herds and those who are taking care of Abram's herds. You know that story and that background. Verse 8. Then Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers." And I've noted here on the screen, the New Living Translation says, "For we are close relatives." Now, obviously, Abram and Lot were not technically brothers, but they were brethren in the sense that they were part of the same family. They were part of the same family. They were connected. Abram appeals to Lot and to his herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen on the basis of the fact that they were closely connected. And so this sets for us then an understanding of the fact that families are those who are closely connected. Yes, there's blood kin, but there's a more important kinship that is there that goes even deeper than blood relationships. You see, Abram understood that just getting enough food for his flocks and herds was not nearly as important as his relationship with his close relative. And that's something that we need to understand as well. That's an important principle that God has set forth in Scripture. Our material possessions never outweigh our concern for those families with whom we are connected. So let's not allow this conflict to come between us and our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. Families are connected. Now that applies obviously to physical families, but it also applies, and we're going to make spiritual applications as we go along here as well. By the way, let me just pause and say this. What if in the church, when there's a dispute, now you probably never had a dispute here, okay? I'm sure you are united and together. You've never disagreed about anything. Right? Okay. Nobody's answering me there. Certainly, anytime we get any group of people together, there's going to be disagreements. There's things that we have different opinions about, etc. But isn't there a spiritual application there? Let's not fight about these things that really ultimately don't matter, because we are closely connected. We are close relatives. You see, the blood that connects us is not the same blood that connected Abram and Lot, physical blood. It's the blood of Christ. That's the blood that courses through our spiritual veins, so to speak. All right? So that there's a spiritual principle that applies in this particular case. Families are closely connected. Secondly, families are committed. And one of the great stories in the Old Testament is the story of Ruth and Naomi. So to look at this, I want us to look at this story briefly of Ruth and Naomi. when do we need to quit, Jacob? I just want to make sure, is it 10 till, 15 till? When do we?
10, yeah, about 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, all right. All right, so we'll get to this. I want to get to the last part for sure. A godly family is a committed family. You know that Ruth marries a man who dies. She has 2 sons who marry daughters of the Moabites. Those sons unfortunately die, so you got Ruth as a widow and 2 daughters-in-law who are widows as well. And so Naomi, what did I say? I messed that totally up. Naomi has 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, who were Moabites, and they're widows as well. So Naomi says to them, look, girls, I've got nothing for you here. I'm paraphrasing this. I've got nothing for you here. You guys go back to home. Go back home to your Moabite people and let them take care of you because I can't take care of you, and I've got nothing to offer you. And that's sort of behind the scenes here. That's the reason that Ruth was sending them away. It wasn't because she didn't care about them or didn't love them. It was she really couldn't support them. There was nothing she could do for them. And she knew that if they went back to their people, they could find someone that could help them. But Orpah decides to go back. Okay, she decides to return to the Moabites. But I love Ruth's response to Naomi. In all this grief and all this sorrow and all this difficulty that they dealt with, think about it. They've lost a father, they've lost sons, husbands. They really, in that culture, would have been basically beggars because there wasn't a social security system. There wasn't any kind of safety net for widows. Widows had to be taken care of by extended family or by the community. And so they're pretty much left with nothing. But I love what Ruth said. Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. You know this very well. She says, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. Now, we use that sometimes in marriage ceremonies. I looked at y'all's marriage ceremony. We use that in your marriage ceremony, okay? And now, obviously, a marriage is not the context in which this is said, but the principle remains the same for all families, right? Ruth said, I am making a commitment to you. And I'll say some more about commitment in tonight's lesson. Okay, that'll be one of the foundational principles for marriages that we need to talk about and think about. The idea of being committed. But Ruth said, I want to be committed to you, and I will be committed to you no matter what. She made a promise and vowed that she would stay with Naomi no matter what. By the way, you know the outcome of that story. Go over to Matthew chapter 1. When Matthew tells about where Jesus came from, isn't it interesting that one of the people in that genealogy that's listed, that's mentioned, is a Moabite woman, a heathen, named Ruth? I mean, it's one of those stories that kind of makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. You know, and it goes back to the fact that Ruth was committed to her mother-in-law. And so families are groups of people that are committed to one another, that are willing to stick with one another, even if there's all kinds of reasons not to. And there were all kinds of reasons for Ruth to go back home. But she stuck it out no matter what. Okay, third thing. A godly family is also a caring family. Godly family is a caring family. Fill in the blanks there. And to illustrate this, there are many ways we could, many stories we could go to, but I'd like to go to John chapter 11, the story of Lazarus. Mary and Martha lived in Bethany, fairly near to Jerusalem, and they were friends with Jesus, and they had a brother Lazarus, and Jesus receives word that Lazarus is sick and is probably going to die, and so they said, you know, Lord, just please come and be with us. They knew that Jesus was a healer. They knew Jesus could help, and so they asked Jesus to come. Jesus delayed his coming because he knew what was going to happen. Okay? He knew that he was going to be able to heal Lazarus, in this case, heal him from the power of death. Okay? And so he wasn't worried about that. He wasn't even concerned about that because he had faith and trust in God. So he delayed his coming intentionally. And then he finally comes to Bethany, and this story sort of unfolds. And we'll pick up the story here about verse 32. When Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. This is almost I don't know if it's a reprimand to Jesus, or if it's a statement of faith, or just an outcry of despair. Exactly what it is there. But she puts faith and confidence in Jesus that he could have helped the situation, but he didn't. He wasn't there. Okay? And then verse 33 says, when Jesus saw, therefore, her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. Verse 34, he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Verse 35, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Illustrates so many principles about Jesus, about his concern, his compassion, his care, particularly for this family. And so the Jews were saying, behold how he loved him. Behold how he loved him. They looked at Jesus, they saw the situation, they saw the circumstances, and they said, this is one who loves this family. He loves this man. And his love is demonstrated in so many ways. Now, I think there's about a dozen times in the New Testament, in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where Jesus is said to have had compassion on people. And he cared about all people in every circumstance of life. And those compassionate moments that are described as such in Scripture usually deal with some kind of need or some kind of suffering or some kind of sorrow, something connected with that. For example, the widow of Nain, the 5,000 that he fed on that occasion, other such situations like that. Jesus was moved with compassion. But Jesus sets the example for us of what it means to be a family in terms of caring for one another. When he observed how deeply hurt all the mourners were, they all said, behold how he loved them. So let's close this out. I always like to have a now what to a lesson. In other words, those are all interesting stories and good points to make. But what does this all mean? What can we do with this? What's the practical application of this? So I hope that you'll be looking for that each time that we get together. We talk about these things because we're going to talk about a lot of concepts and philosophies and principles that are sort of overarching. But we need to know, okay, what am I going to do with this when I get home? All right? So the first thing, what did I do? Uh-oh, I messed up. There we go. Pushed the wrong button. And that is this. A connected family, if we're really connected with one another, you'll be intentional about time. You know, we talk about quality time and quantity time. I'm just telling you, quality time is quantity time. I wish I could have had time to enlarge on this point more. But there's so many things that pull us away, that draw us in different directions. We live busy lives. We schedule everything. Maybe we're overscheduled at times with our children, with our jobs, with our lives. But if we are really going to be connected as we should, then we will be conscious of time. You've probably heard the story about the British Parliament leader who was a very busy man, and his son kept begging him over and over and over again, Dad, will you please take me fishing? Will you take me up into the Highlands and take me fishing? Finally, the man agreed to do that. So he took off a day and took his son fishing. Both of those men, the young man, the boy, and the father, kept journals. Interestingly, years later, someone looked in the journals, and the member of Parliament had written, spent a day fishing with my son, a day wasted. The son, however, had written in his journal, went fishing with my dad today, the best day ever. And what does that tell us about the importance of spending time with one another? We never know how important, how valuable, how precious, how far-reaching the impact of just a little time. Would to God that all of us would slow down and realize the importance and the value of time in our families. So a connected family is one that is very intentional about spending time together. You need to give Jacob time to spend with his family, okay? Because he's a very driven guy. I know Jacob well enough to know that he has things he wants to do, he has things he wants to accomplish, he has things he has accomplished. But you need to give him time. In fact, you need to make him spend time with his family. Amen, Brittany? Okay, and I'm not picking on Jacob. But that applies to every single one of us. But I am telling you, as a church family, one of the things that preachers struggle with is being pulled in a lot of different directions and not prioritizing family time. So you need to be sure that you guys check him on that, okay? Are you spending time with your family? Are you taking care of your wife? Are you taking care of your kids? Are your kids going to be able to say, best day ever, because Dad spent some time with me? And that applies to moms, dads, all of us, wherever we are, okay? Secondly, a committed family will be supportive, and I put NMW, no matter what, okay? No matter what. Are parents, are your kids always going to do the right thing? No. You know how I know? Because you didn't do the right thing always. And they're going to make mistakes. But you know, you still love them, and you're still going to be there for them, and you're going to be there to help them pick up the pieces. You're not always going to fix everything for them, but you're going to be there to be supportive and encouraging of them. And you need to have that no matter what kind of love for them. That no matter what kind of support for them. You know, in the days of texting and so forth, Debbie and I text one another. That's my wife. We're both busy. She's a school teacher, and whatever. We stay in touch through the day and whatever with text messages. In fact, she texted me this morning to make sure I was here, and I didn't notice it because my phone was on vibrate. So I got in trouble because I didn't call her back and text her back and tell her I made a mistake. But a lot of times when we will text one another, I will end the text with ILYNMW. I love you no matter what. She knows what that means. Okay? And that's the mentality that we ought to have in our families. That we're so committed that I'm going to love you no matter what. Doesn't mean I always like everything that you do. Doesn't mean I'm always going to necessarily encourage all of your endeavors or whatever. But I'm going to love you and I'm going to be supportive of you no matter what. Okay? And so that's a very important concept that if we could get, then that would be a blessing to us. And then finally, a caring family will observe the golden rule. What is the golden rule? Somebody tell me. You don't have to quote it exactly.
You would have to
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, okay? Treat other people. You know what? We understand that when we're talking about the world, we're talking about people in business, people that we communicate with at school or whatever the case may be. But sometimes we forget that in families. We forget the golden rule when it comes to those that are closest to us. We just don't observe that. And so we need to be sure that we maintain a golden rule mentality even in our families, and especially in our families. Your kids, your husband, your wife, your brothers and sisters ought to be able to say, you know what, he always treated me, she always treated me just like I wanted to be treated, and treated me so special. So those are some of the now what things that we can do. Observe the golden rule in our day-to-day family.